Everyone, welcome to MMI's Brown Bag Lunch. Today's topic is navigating uncertainty and the upcoming elections. And hope you guys are enjoying a lunch or something. This should be a lively conversation just to keep everyone updated. Today, I'm joined by two special friends and guests. We have a Democrat and a Republican strategist. We've got Katelynn Bradley, who's a fellow Hoya. She went to Georgetown Law School, as did I, different graduate years, and she really was a senior advisor for the Financial Services Committee on the Democrat side and is now a shareholder at a law firm. And then we have Kevin Edgar, who is, of course, also a lawyer and I think has like 2 decades of experience as a Republican, both at the Financial Services Committee. I think you also were at the New York Stock Exchange for almost a decade and the PCAOB. And Katelynn, I should also mention that you were at the SEC, I think, for about a year. So you guys are definitely true Washington strategists. I think you guys have a great eye on what's happening. If anyone who's listening in live has questions, you can send in a question in the chat feature. I'm happy to ask some of the questions. We're going to steer off the conversation, lead off the conversation. We have about half an hour. I think, looking at this theme of navigating uncertainty, you guys are now advising technology and financial services clients. What are you telling your clients? Are you getting the sense that they're stressed? I should note, there was an article today in the newspaper from the American Psychology Association that says 77% of Americans are super stressed about the elections right now. That runs across the board for Democrats and Republicans. Are your clients giving you like tough questions right now on what to do, and what are you telling them?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think it is a stressful time. There's a lot of uncertainty. I think, as this race, as we get closer to the election, the race will tighten, furthering that kind of stress. But, at the end of the day, our clients have hired someone like me and someone like Kevin to mitigate that stress and to tell them and help them navigate DC, to tell them about the politics and the policies and provide them with that subject matter expertise. And they've gone ahead and hired us ahead of time so that they have that level of comfort and that they're able to prepare for any eventuality, regardless of if there's a Dem sweep or, some other kind of, change to the Senate or to the administration. And so, I would say just generally for all clients and all potential clients, I mean, that's what you really want to do when you're thinking about DC and you're getting stressed about it, is to really think about, whether it makes sense to go out and hire someone like us that can, that can provide you with that level of comfort and that can really prepare you for engaging on the issues before they come to a head. So that, when your company has a issue area that comes to the fore, that you're prepared, you have champions in Congress and at the agencies that understand your business model, that support the issues that you support, and that are really willing to push for those, whether it be a defensive strategy or a offensive strategy.
Yeah, I would agree, and thanks, Kirsten, for having us on today. So many businesses are going about their business, and they don't always think about how Washington can change their business very, very easily and very quickly sometimes. And they're so focused on their business that when they realize that something has happened, it could be too late. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And when Katelynn and I can provide clients and potential clients with, again, that level of comfort, members' opinions are shaped by who they hear from and their staff as well. And if they don't ever hear from you or only hear from you as something is going to the finish line, as something is being considered at an agency, at an open meeting, or something is going into a request for comment, that's too late. That's too late. There is always a chance to comment, but if you're not there at the beginning when the ideas are being shaped, you're already behind. And you see that a lot, especially and when it comes to matters of governance and disclosure. So many public companies they're building whatever they build, or they're selling whatever they're selling, they're making whatever they're making, and they don't think about, well, where did this come from? Where did this proposal come from? And the level of engagement is so crucial. It has to be part of the thinking, and that's not every day, but that you have to be engaged. But you can't just come in as when Katelynn and I were on committee. Showing up 10 minutes before we go to a markup of a bill is generally not a good way to voice your concern. But as for uncertainty, right, everyone wants as much certainty as they can. You can get more certainty by engaging and by participating and by at least saying, all right, we had a good day. We shared our views, we shared our concerns, we shared our perspectives about what is working and what is not working. And you can't guarantee success, but you can pretty much guarantee unhappiness and more uncertainty if you don't engage.
I'm hearing you guys say, don't take your head in the sand approach. Like, even if you are worried about going in, go ahead and introduce yourself. Because I'm looking at some of the people who are listening now. We have people from the crypto industry. We've got some automated trading industry people. And I think the core message here is to get in early, right before stuff hits the proverbial fan. I want to get your thoughts looking at the next, month or so, just from a process perspective. And I'll turn this to Katelynn maybe first. I know the Democrats are having a process to pick out their leadership. I think that's on the November 18th, 19th, the leadership elections, right? There are a couple contested ones, and then committee chairs November 30th. Do you foresee any surprises in that realm? It's for financial services and capital markets. This is not usually a very political issue. It's more of a policy issue, right? What is your sense looking ahead at the process for people who are curious about the Democrat process in the next month or two?
Well, and I would say too, I mean, you mentioned those dates, and I mean, I think that's good to flag, but I think this election, going back to this election, it stands to throw a wrench in things. So right now, the Democrats are preparing on both sides of the House. So the House and the Senate are both preparing as if they're going to, control the Congress and eventually the White House as well. But the unprecedented number of mail-in ballots that we're expecting, the different capacities of the states to address that, those mail-in ballots and those new procedures that is probably adopted to make those counting of those ballots easier, is going to, I think, result in significant delays. And it's going to be delays in not just the presidential election, but in the Senate races and in some House races too. And so when all of that's going on, I don't foresee them being able to hold any elections or get started on their process. That's not to say that they're not sitting there right now campaigning. So these chairs and those who want to take over, like foreign affairs, for example, which is an open seat, they're of course out there now talking to their colleagues, building consensus, telling them what they would work on, so that when the time eventually comes, they do have the backing of their colleagues and their core support. And then they're also, I would say too, looking to make sure that they have all of their ducks in the row for the administration. They're interviewing and identifying potential candidates. They're talking to one another to make sure that those candidates have the right mix of diverse viewpoints and diverse race, ethnicity, and gender, and making sure that, when January rolls around and the dust settles, that these nominations hearings can get done, that these committees can get stood up very quickly, and Democrats can come out swinging and show America really, like, here's how we would do things, or, we are going to do things now, and this is how we're different. And so, all that said, I appreciate that you have the dates there, and I am hopeful. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's not going to happen by the 18th, but in every race. But I do think, we do need to think about being patient and expecting some delays.
That's very interesting. These are almost like aspirational dates in your book, because typically in an election cycle, the dates that are projected might be more firmly held, but we're expecting a lot of, I guess, turbulence of uncertainty, even on state level elections, not just the federal. Kevin, can I ask you, what do you think is going through the heads of some of the, Republican leadership and what they might be doing the next, month or two? Are they going to be, there's still quite a few vacancies for appointments and judicial nominees. What do you see would be a key agenda on the lame duck for Republicans, just generally?
So if, so there's a few scenarios, right? The Senate control does not change immediately, right? It changes in January, with the exception of the Arizona Senate race, which is a special election. So whoever wins that, if the seat does change party control, that new senator would be sworn in the fall after the election, not in January. There are still about 30-something district court judge nominations that are pending. There are plenty of administration posts that are pending. There's a lot of posts that are vacant and there is no nominee. If there's a party switch, if Vice President Biden is elected, the nominations for administration posts will end. They will not. I would find it very difficult to give you a scenario where people are being put into posts when they would have to vacate them on January 20th at noon. As for judges, I think that process continues through the end of this year. In terms of big legislation, there's probably only 2 or 3 things. Could there one be a COVID response? Number 5 or 6, whatever we're up to, the funding of the government, which right now we're at a December 11th funding scenario. How is that a full year? Is it gets us only into sometime next year? Unknown. The legislation that authorizes all defense spending, called the National Defense Authorization Act, that's a big annual bill that has been enacted into law. I want to say it's 59 years consecutively. So those would be the legislative fixes there, and there's always a wrap up at the very end of the session. Katelynn and I have been surprised in the past, as the Senate is leaving, little bills get enacted into law. You learn about them in a big list. But for major issues, it's probably those 3: COVID, the defense authorization and spending, and then judges. Between the election and the end of the session. And if the president is reelected, not to get too weedy, but there will be a push to get nominations done, because if they're not done, they have to be resubmitted next year. And you have to start the process in some way over again.
So another scenario I've heard people talking about is, okay, let's say the Democrats get the Senate, right? But they don't get the 60 vote majority. How is that going to look like? What do you see happening with the filibuster rule? Or like, let's say an issue, like, let's say the financial transaction tax, if Democrats were to support it, would they need like Republican buy-in to get to 60 votes? What is your sense of what the cooperation or lack of cooperation might look like? Do you have any hope for bipartisanship, I guess? If it doesn't get to 60 votes, to work together to get stuff done?
Well, I feel like I'm sure Kevin's probably got the same questions from his clients as well, and also, just generally in DC. I think the filibuster, getting rid of the filibuster, has been, a hot topic of conversation. There are folks predicting on either side, but I think it's a big move that, certainly would make things easier in the Senate. Right, regardless of who the party is in control, you can quickly, vote something just like you are doing in the House and get a simple majority. And if you look at the House passed bills versus the number of Senate passed bills, I mean, it's insane how the number of House bills basically the Senate bills dwarfs the size of the House bills. And so, I see the willingness to sort of do that, to try to make sure that they can get the Senate and Democrats in general can can push through their message, but I also think they have to look, long term and, see and put themselves in the place of, well, what happens in the eventuality that we're not in control? And so I think there are some members there that need to be convinced that now is the time to do this, and it's not going to come back and bite us later as it has with judicial nominations. So, I think if Democrats in leadership and Democrats are very serious about getting rid of the filibuster, they're going to have to really show that they need to do that. And to do that, they're going to bring up some of the big ticket items that they would bring up anyway, but bring them up on healthcare, on COVID relief, and make sure that, they're pushing it and they're making the argument like that this is something that America needs. And then they're going to have to show that it was the filibuster that prevented that from becoming law. And so I think you have to build that momentum, build that consensus that it is the filibuster that's preventing Democrats from achieving their agenda. On bipartisan support, I think, there are going to be plenty of opportunities. I think, right off the bat, I don't know that, we'll see a lot of those opportunities taking shape, because I think, like I said, the Democrats are going to be going out there trying to show, that they can achieve their priorities and what they're messaging at home in their states. But I do think there are opportunities, especially in like the capital market space, where, both sides of the aisle can come together and say, I want to support small businesses and jobs. And so one way to do that is to support to encourage private investment in those companies through, promoting investment through venture capital companies or business development companies. And so I can see that. And it was I think something similar to what Kevin and I both worked on in 2018, which is the Jobs Act 2.0 or 3.0 if you're Kevin. But if you're counting which Jobs Acts, but basically it was a package of 32 bills that we were able to get near unanimous support for on the floor. And, we both of our bosses at the end of the day, former Chairman Hensarling and my former boss, Chairwoman Maxine Waters, decided at the end of the day, we need to be doing more for our nation's small businesses. And, we need to be basically go big or go home, get something done here. And so, they were both very serious about coming to the bargaining table, and that's sort of what you need. You need leadership that's going to be there and the right message that's going to carry forward with those proposals, and jobs and small businesses is one of those.
And Kevin, I think you've also seen a track record of both sides of the aisle coming together on capital markets issues, whether it's CFIUS or housing bills. Can you talk about some of, I'd say, like the successes? Sometimes the media doesn't like to write about what's working in Washington. There are more stories about what's broken, but maybe take this opportunity to highlight some of the things that actually did work out in capital markets.
Oh, absolutely. So when we were able to pass Jobs Act 3, immediately the story was not 406-4, the House vote. It was, doesn't look good in the Senate, because that's more appealing, right? No one wants to talk about what works and the great vote. And what we have learned is 406-4 in the House means nothing in the Senate. It really doesn't, because it doesn't mean your bill is not worthy. There are so many other bills in so many other jurisdictions that may have received equally super bipartisan votes, and then everything is being stacked against different Senate interests. And I know that frustrates a lot of House members. They say, hey, I worked hard. I went out and found the bipartisanship. I went out and worked the affected industries. I got to a point with my lead co-sponsor and my other co-sponsors that we could all agree on these words on the page. You got to help us, Senate. And I think senators acknowledge that frustration. But there were other issues. We rewrote CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. We modernized that. That was a very substantial piece of legislation. There was some notable housing legislation that was enacted into law. There was the business development company modernization that was very important, and we had worked on that for 5 or 6 years. There was the large bill more on the banking and credit union and financial institutions side, the what is known as S2155. The title of that bill is too long to mention. Not a lot of words, but that had a very small capital markets title, but it was still bills that Katelynn and I had worked on that made some important changes, and we worked on them, and we figured out a way to what were the words that we all could agree on. And yeah, there are always going to be some fundamental differences as it relates to the authority of the SEC and the active nature of the commission and what we want them doing. And do we want to defer more? Do we want to give them more clear legislative direction? Is it more about innovation and modernizing laws to help companies that were never envisioned in 1933 and 4 work within a legal structure that was written largely when the radio was the technology of the day, and the ticker tape was still a real machine that people read and used, and you had thousands of more people involved. So there is a tension. But there has been far more positive changes that have been worked out, at least in the House, than the negative ones. And of course, it's more fun to talk about the bills that were contentious or the votes that the debate was heated, because that's what people want to read about. Reading about 406 to 4 is generally not fun.
Well, so this raises another question for me. I'll direct this at Katelynn, right? There are many reasons why a bill might be introduced, right? It could be to actually, be signed into law eventually, but it might also be for the purposes of giving air cover on a issue, to try to get regulators to work on an issue, or maybe to smoke people out on their position on an issue. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the process of, people in this, people listening right now might be thinking about bills they've seen floated that are introduced. Are those just kind of part of the laboratory of democracy, just putting these ideas out there? Or like, what is the process for some of these bills that are providing ear cover, perhaps?
Yeah, and I think, I talk to clients about this a lot. It's trying to, help them understand that when a bill is introduced, it's not going to be immediately signed into law anytime soon, like in the next month, in the next week, maybe not even at Congress. And it depends on a couple things, right? So if it's bipartisan and it's an immediate issue, how bipartisan is it? Is it enough where you could get 2/3 of the House to vote for it on suspension? If that's the case, then maybe it's more likely to move than not. If it's not, then it could take a long time. The business development company bill that Kevin just mentioned, we worked together on that for about 6 years, and it had bipartisan support, but there were hiccups along the way. The agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission chair, Chair White, she had, her own views that she wrote to Congress about, and so we had to incorporate those, and it takes time. And so what happens in the House, notably, is you have a bill won Congress, you have a hearing on it, you start to build your record, and then 2 years later the whole Congress resets and you got to do it again. And so and the virtue of doing that too is that well, number one, you get smarter on the issues. Staff get smarter, members get smarter, they hear from more different viewpoints at hearings, and then they also sort of hone in on each of the the specifics in the bills. And then, and then eventually it becomes law, and it's, a real product of bipartisanship. Or there are alternatively other examples where members introduce bills that are not going to be bipartisan. They will never be bipartisan. And it's either a bill that's a pure messaging bill, right? You want to go out there and tell your constituents, like, I introduced this bill that's going to stand up for XYZ in my district, and, I can't help it that the other side of the aisle won't come to an agreement, or they want to pressure the agency who is perhaps in their party. So in the case of a Democratic sweep, you could have a Democratic bill pressuring the SEC and giving the SEC cover to revise its accredited investor definition, for example, right? So what you want to do is you want to introduce it and show that you have the support of Congress, and that if the agency comes out there and produces something, that it's going to have, another branch of the government giving you the nod that that's sort of the right approach, that's the right step. And you're also going to get, with, what comes with legislation, you're going to get, more people looking at it from the outside. And so you'll get more supporters in terms of advocacy groups, a lot of the advocacy groups in DC, for example, the trade organizations, and even individual clients. And so that kind of helps build another record on top of the agency's rulemaking record, and then, support an ultimate change in the law.
You raise an interesting question for me when you talk about kind of the messaging bills that are more partisan. I'm looking at kind of the sense of how Wall Street is, or anti-Wall Street messaging is being positioned by either Democrats or Republicans. And there have been recent financial transaction tax proposals that have not been bipartisan. When you look at the sponsors, they've typically been, many Democrats who aren't on a tax committee or not on a financial services committee. And it's unclear if they're messaging anti-Wall Street rhetoric or if it really is a source of revenue that those sponsors are looking after. We certainly have looked at the financial transaction tax as, a tax on savings and retirement. But I was curious to get each of your thoughts on whether you think an FTT would have legs in the next Congress, if this is something that participants, whether they're, Wall Street participants or people at pension funds, should be looking at closely for next year. And I'll let each of you respond, maybe Katelynn and then Kevin.
Yeah, I would say, the FTT, or financial transaction tax, I don't think has escaped anyone's notice, particularly those who are in the capital market space and operating in the capital market space. And particularly, with New Jersey's recent bill out there, legislation on this. So, I think a couple things, right, is that Dems, I think, view this as a way to further their message on income inequality, right? So how do we tax areas or issue areas where we can use it to pay for, maybe even something that, like another priority. So we can use it as a pay for healthcare or whatever, or we can just use it to reduce that wealth gap that we've seen, particularly after the pandemic. And so I think at the end of the day, I agree with you. I think the right answer is that that it is, if you're applying a FTT across the board, I don't see that it would have real legs. I think it penalizes retirement savers, new investors, alike, and I don't know that that's the right messaging, even though that it hasn't stopped Congress and others from trying. That said, I could see some permutations where they would say, well, let's only apply FTT to a certain market participant or a certain product, and there, you look at different other kinds of taxes, like Senator Wyden has a mark-to-market tax on derivatives. And so, you can see sort of different permutations where it's not exactly the same as a broad financial transaction tax, but it's easier to justify taxing that individual or taxing that group of individuals because of their ability to pay, or because of maybe the impact of it. So for example, if it's a tax on order cancellations, so maybe it's reducing the noise that's in the system. And so you can justify it that way.
So, we saw an evolution of how financial transaction taxes were. When I first joined the committee, and then early on, there's this woeful level of budgeting available to the financial capital markets regulators. They need this money to do better because everyone out there is so much more sophisticated than the agencies. It's not a fair relationship. So they need more money to go hire more people, to build more technology, to be more aggressive regulators. Then it became, whoa, well, that's sort of, we don't need the money for the regulators. Now we need money to spend on lots of different priorities and programs. Tax policy influences behavior. It does. And all of the projections might look great on paper until a tax is put into place, and then the projections can go by the wayside because maybe less trades are made. Maybe transactions are done in other jurisdictions. Does it, and the breadth of any tax, what we see in New Jersey, for example, is it would affect mortgages because it would, at least the original bill, they have a modified bill now, right? But there would have been a tax on the processing of Treasury security transactions. Well, that influences mortgages, credit card payments. There's anything that benchmarks off of a Treasury. So the breadth of tax changes will certainly change behavior. And I think, Katelynn and I saw when we were on committee, when they were doing the last transportation bill, they decided, well, we can't talk about the gas tax, so we're going to find all sorts of other fun ways to fund transportation projects. And they used a fund that the Federal Reserve had available to it to pay for some of that transportation bill. So they get you can find pots of money and be very creative, but how do you pay for things that could actually hurt the people, right? Pension funds, are they going to change their behavior if they have to pay a tax on processing or the number of trades they submit or the volume, because they all have obligations. And they're hiring sophisticated and smart people to help them manage their portfolios. And if everything comes down to, well, we can't really make these trades because of a tax, the ramifications are broad. I don't even know if we can, in the time we have, or even if we were talking for 3 hours, could we go through all of the possible scenarios that a financial transaction tax could hurt. It would certainly hurt small company capital formation. Dollars are scarce. You have to go to where the money the investment makes the most sense. It would certainly hurt savers. It would certainly hurt of any level or any age. So there are a lot of more unknowns than knowns about financial transaction taxes, Kirsten.
Well, thank you. And I know you authored an op-ed on the New Jersey financial transaction tax very recently. I know we're at the end of our hour, or half hour, so I appreciate you guys both for coming on. I hope everyone had a good lunch while watching this. And I know, Katelynn, people can reach you if they look at the website of Brownstein Hyatt. Do you have a social media handle on Twitter or anything where people can follow you?
I do not.
We do not. Okay. Well, we'll put this on the @Modern Markets feed, and then I know, Kevin, you're at BakerHostetler, right? You have your information there. Do you have a Twitter feed?
I have a Twitter feed to follow Twitter or follow. I don't.
Come on, guys. Come on.
I don't.
I'm guilty too. I don't update my personal Twitter account as much as I should.
No.
This is all going to be available at Modern Markets. So I hope anyone who's watching, you find this interesting and share it with your friends when we post it. Thank you so much for joining, guys. And I hope you keep all your clients unstressed so they're not in the 77% of Americans that are freaking out right now. I'm sure with you guys counseling them, they're in that quarter that's totally chill right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.